Resource hints are a way we can improve web performance by telling the browser that it needs to make connections to other domains or even download content before it normally would. Hence the name resource hints, as you're giving the browser a hot tip on what's to come. You create resource hints in the head of a HTML document using a link element like this. There are a number of different types of resource hints. This tells the browser to perform a DNS lookup on a domain, which, as we've learned, is one of the steps required for the browser to connect to the server. So by the time the browser has discovered it needs to download a resource from the domain, it's able to form a connection a little bit quicker than otherwise, because part of the work is already done. Pre-connect is a lot like DNS prefetch, except that instead of just performing a DNS lookup earlier, the browser then goes on to make the TCP handshake an optional TLS handshake if HTTPS. This allows the browser to ready a full connection early, so when it later discovers that it needs to download a resource, a connection is already open and ready to go. If we know we'll definitely need a resource later in the loading process, we can tell the browser using a prefetch resource hint that it should download and cache the file in preparation. This could be CSS, JavaScript, or even a HTML document. Anything that's cacheable really. However, this resource hint isn't definitive. If the browser determines it has more important resources to load, like a large fonts file on a slow network for example, it may abandon the prefetch to focus on what it deems important. Also, it's worth noting that as of the time of recording, Safari doesn't yet support prefetch resource hints, so any benefits on that browser will be lost. Preload is very similar to prefetch, except that it's no longer a suggestion, it's an order. The browser must download the file referenced in the resource hint, regardless of what it thinks, straight away. Again, this isn't supported in all major browsers. At the time of recording, Firefox doesn't support this resource hint. Pre-render is the most extensive resource hint, and can only be used with other web pages. In addition to opening a connection and downloading the page's HTML, the browser goes on to parse its contents and then download and execute its discovered resources as well. Essentially, the page is rendered in a hidden tab in anticipation of the user visiting it. Unfortunately, if this doesn't happen, then all the effort on the current page will have gone to waste. This means pre-render is best used where you can predict the user's next move with a high level of accuracy, like a results page following a search, or a multi-step checkout journey going in a single direction. Currently, as far as major browser support goes, pre-render is currently only supported on Chrome and, strangely, Internet Explorer 11. If MLE Power were a real website, we'd try our best to funnel users towards the products page as part of a sales journey. With this in mind, let's use the prefetch resource hint to tell the browser to download and cache the products page HTML. So if the user does head in that direction, the transition between pages should happen quicker. In the Nunjucks head template, add this snippet. This Nunjucks conditional will add a new link element on every page except the products page to instruct the browser to fire off the prefetch. So, does it work? First off, it's important to measure the impact loading this extra resource has on the homepage, as if it's slowing it down for relatively little gain on the products page, the trade-off won't be worth it. Here's a comparison of the homepage with and without the prefetch. As you can see, the difference is negligible. And as for the products page itself, the prefetch has meant that it renders nearly half a second early. Looking at the waterfall, you can see why. As the browser already cached the HTML back on the homepage, we no longer need to download it on page load, and can focus exclusively on uncached assets, like the images. To capture this data, meant using web page test scripting capabilities. Here, on test config, we're telling web page test to first load the home page, which triggers the prefetch, before then navigating to the products page. We use the log data function to suppress data logging here until we're on the products page. Before we wrap up, you may be thinking, why not use preload in this scenario? This would guarantee that the products page will always be downloaded early, right? This is true. And when comparing prefetch and preload's impact on the products page, the results are pretty identical. The difference though is back on the home page. The home page with preload renders half a second later than with prefetch. This is because the browser treats preload as a command rather than a suggestion, and is prioritizing it over loading the current page's own critical resources. Contrast this to prefetch, where the products page is downloaded with a much lower priority. With this in mind, it's clear preload is better suited to loading a page's own critical resources.